He didn't remember the drive out of the city. Later, fragments would come back to him. The red blur of brake lights, the steady vibration of the steering wheel, the radio murmuring a song he hated, but at the time, it was as if his body moved on its own while his mind stayed frozen in the doorway of the apartment. The image wouldn't let go. His wife's startled face, his friend's voice scrambling for excuses, the smell of wine and something intimate that didn't belong to him anymore. He hadn't shouted. That surprised him most. He had simply turned, taken his keys, and left, as though silence might preserve what little dignity he had left. By nightfall, the city lights thinned into scattered lamps and then vanished altogether. The road narrowed, the asphalt cracked, and the trees closed in, dark and watchful. The house appeared suddenly, just beyond a bend, his grandfather's place, crouched at the edge of the village like an old animal that had chosen to die alone. The roof sagged slightly, and the windows reflected nothing but the black of the forest behind him. He parked, cut the engine, and sat there until the ticking of cooling metal became too loud to ignore. Inside, the air smelled of dust and dried herbs. His grandfather had been meticulous in strange ways. Everything had a place, even if the place made no sense to anyone else. A cracked mirror hung in the hallway, and for a moment he avoided looking at it, afraid of what kind of man might stare back. When he finally did, he saw someone older than he remembered being that morning. He dropped his bag, sank onto a chair, and let the quiet settle around him. It wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, pressing against his ears. The first night, he slept poorly. The wind worried the shutters, and the house creaked like it was trying to speak. At dawn, he woke to a sound that didn't belong to the house at all. A rooster, loud and indignant, declaring the morning to anyone who would listen. Light seeped through the curtains. For the first time since he'd left the apartment, he felt something other than shock, an odd, reluctant curiosity about this place he hadn't seen since his grandfather's funeral. The village was smaller than he remembered. A handful of houses clustered along the road, smoke rising from chimneys, a dog sleeping in the dust. People noticed him immediately. He felt their eyes, measuring, comparing him to the man they had known. At the small shop, the woman behind the counter paused when she saw him, her smile flickering before settling into something polite but guarded. "You're back," she said, not quite a question. When he nodded, she added, "Your grandfather's house." "Yes," he said. His voice sounded rough, unused. She handed him his change carefully. He was a man people talked about. He didn't ask what kind of talk. He thanked her and left, the words following him like a low hum. Over the next few days, he repaired what he could. He fixed a broken fence, cleared leaves from the yard, and patched a leak in the roof. The work grounded him. At night, he cooked simple meals and read old notebooks he found in a drawer. Lists of repairs, weather observations, cryptic notes about people's names followed by dates and numbers. One evening, a loose floorboard revealed a bundle of letters tied with twine. They were old, written in a careful hand. He read until his eyes burned. They told a story the village had never told him. Years ago, there had been a fire at the grain storage on the edge of town. The official version blamed negligence, a man cutting corners. His grandfather's name appeared again and again, always paired with words like responsibility and fault. But the letters hinted at something else. Warnings ignored, pressure from people with money, a choice made to prevent something far worse. His grandfather had stepped forward when no one else would. The realization sat uneasily with him. He began to see the village differently. The old man who asked for help fixing a gate, the woman who brought him bread without explanation, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room and then resumed with careful neutrality. They had lived with a lie because it was easier than admitting the truth, and his grandfather had paid the price. One afternoon, a car he recognized too well pulled up outside the house. His former friend stepped out, confidence worn thin by nerves. He talked fast, hands moving, explanations tumbling over one another. He said the affair was a mistake, that it wasn't what it looked like, that money had complicated things. The words came out sharp and ugly. There had been deals, he admitted, small ones at first, then bigger. His wife had been drawn in, promised security, promised escape. It wasn't love. It was convenience dressed up as something else. Listening, he felt a strange calm. The betrayal hurt, but it no longer defined him. What angered him was the familiarity of the pattern, the same pressure, the same willingness to sacrifice someone else to stay clean. When his friend finished, waiting for forgiveness or a fight, he simply said, "You should leave." The truth didn't stay buried. It rarely does in small places. He spoke to the right people, showed them the letters, connected names and dates that matched records others had tried to forget. The village stirred. Arguments broke out in kitchens and on doorsteps. Old loyalties shifted. When the full story emerged, about the fire, about the money that had flowed quietly through hands that pretended to be empty, there was no denying it. The day it all came to a head, people gathered near the old storage site. Voices rose and fell. Some looked ashamed. Some looked angry. Many looked stunned. They spoke his grandfather's name differently now, with hesitation, with something close to respect. It wasn't redemption, not fully, but it was a start. That evening, he walked back to the house alone. The sky burned red at the horizon, then softened into blue. He thought of the life he'd left behind, the apartment that no longer felt like home, the marriage that had ended not with a bang but with a quiet, devastating clarity. He thought of his grandfather, of the weight of choices made and carried in silence. He stayed, not because the village needed him, and not because the past demanded it, but because for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something he had to run from. In the quiet of the old house, with its creaks and memories, he found a steadier kind of strength. And when people passed by and nodded, no longer whispering, he nodded back, rooted at last in a place that knew the cost of truth, and the value of finally speaking it. He didn't remember closing the door behind him. One moment he was standing in the hallway of the apartment, the next he was halfway down the stairs, keys clenched so tightly in his fist that the metal cut into his skin. The silence was the worst part. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just the sound of his own breathing and the faint murmur of voices behind the door, already rearranging reality without him. The image replayed itself over and over. The unmade bed, the way his friend had instinctively reached for his shirt, as if modesty could fix anything, the look in his wife's eyes that wasn't guilt so much as irritation at being interrupted. That look followed him all the way to the car. The city peeled away mile by mile. Neon signs gave way to dim streetlights, then to darkness broken only by the occasional pair of headlights rushing past. He drove without thinking, guided by something older than reason, a route imprinted in him long before he'd learned how to name roads. By the time the pavement turned rough and the trees pressed close on either side, his hands had stopped shaking. Shock settled into something colder, heavier. He felt emptied out, as if whatever had been him that morning had stayed behind in that apartment. The house emerged from the dark like a memory made solid. His grandfather's place had always seemed too big when he was a child, too quiet, a structure built for patience rather than comfort. Now it looked smaller, more fragile, but stubbornly present. He cut the engine and listened. Crickets, wind, the distant bark of a dog. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. He stepped out, and the air felt different, cooler, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Inside, dust motes floated in the beam of his phone's flashlight. The furniture stood exactly as it had years ago, preserved by neglect. His grandfather's coat still hung by the door. On impulse, he touched it, half expecting warmth. There was none. He moved slowly through the rooms, opening windows, letting the night air in. When exhaustion finally overtook him, he lay on the narrow bed in the back room and stared at the ceiling until sleep dragged him under. Morning came early. Sunlight forced its way through thin curtains, and for a moment he didn't know where he was. Then memory crashed back, sharp and merciless. He sat up, rubbing his face, and noticed how quiet everything was. The village woke differently than the city, no roar of engines, no constant hum. Just individual sounds, distinct and honest. A rooster crowed somewhere nearby. A door creaked open. Life, proceeding without him. He ventured outside. The yard was overgrown, the fence leaning, but the land itself felt solid. As he worked, pulling weeds, stacking fallen branches, his thoughts loosened their grip. Physical effort left less room for replaying scenes he couldn't change. By midday, sweat-soaked and tired, he felt more present than he had in days. People noticed him soon enough. In a place this small, absence and return were equally remarkable. At the shop, Conversations dipped when he entered, then resumed with careful neutrality. He caught fragments. His grandfather's name, the fire, old grievances spoken in lowered voices. No one said anything directly, but the weight of it pressed on him all the same. Back at the house, curiosity overcame hesitation. He began opening drawers, boxes, cupboards long left untouched. His grandfather had been a man of habits, and habits leave trails. The notebooks were the first clue. Not diaries, exactly, more like records. Who came by, what they asked for, what was owed. It painted a picture of a man deeply enmeshed in the village's life, far more than anyone had admitted at the funeral. The letters confirmed it. They spoke of warnings, of decisions made under pressure, of consequences accepted in silence. The fire hadn't been an accident. It had been a near disaster, narrowly avoided at a cost his grandfather had chosen to bear alone. The knowledge unsettled him. Anger surfaced, not just at the injustice done to a man who could no longer defend himself, but at the familiarity of it. He had just fled from a betrayal built on the same foundation: convenience, silence, and someone else paying the price. Days passed. He fixed the roof properly, borrowed tools, returned them. Slowly, people thawed. An old man asked for help repairing a gate. A woman left a basket of vegetables on his porch without knocking. These small gestures carried more meaning than grand apologies ever could. When the car appeared on the road, he knew who it would be before it stopped. His former friend looked smaller out here, stripped of the city's confidence. They talked in the yard. The explanations came out in a rush. Money problems, bad decisions, rationalizations layered so thick they almost sounded convincing. Almost. Hearing his wife's name spoken like a bargaining chip hardened something in him. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply listened until there was nothing left to say. "You should go," he said at last. The man hesitated, searching his face for something: anger, forgiveness, weakness. Finding none, he left. What followed felt inevitable. Truth has a way of finding cracks. He showed the letters to the right people, people who had been younger then, less invested in preserving a lie. Records were checked, stories compared. The past reassembled itself piece by piece until it could no longer be ignored. The village reacted the only way it knew how: loudly, collectively, and a little too late. On the day everyone gathered near the old storage site, the air buzzed with tension. Voices overlapped, accusations flew. Some defended the old version of events out of habit more than belief. Others demanded answers they'd never thought to ask before. Through it all, he stood quietly, feeling less like a catalyst and more like a witness. This wasn't about him, not really. It was about a debt long overdue. When it was over, nothing felt triumphant. There was no applause, no sudden unity. Just a shared, uncomfortable understanding. People avoided his eyes, then met them, then nodded. It was enough. That evening, he returned to the house as the sky darkened. The forest hummed softly, alive with sounds. He sat on the steps and thought about the road that had brought him here, the betrayal that had shattered his old life, the inheritance of truths he hadn't known he was carrying. Staying wasn't an act of defiance or escape. It was a choice. For the first time since everything fell apart, he felt anchored. Not healed, not whole, but steady. Inside, the house creaked as it always had, settling around him. He imagined his grandfather at the table, writing by lamplight, making choices no one would thank him for. The thought no longer felt heavy. It felt honest, and in that honesty, he found the beginning of something new. He didn't remember the sound of the door closing, only the sensation of air shifting as he turned away from the apartment and everything it contained. The hallway light flickered as he passed beneath it, casting a pale, sickly glow on the walls. His keys were already in his hand, dug so hard into his palm that later he would find half-moon marks on his skin. The silence behind him was unbearable. No shouting followed him, no footsteps, no desperate call of his name. Just muted voices, hurried and low, as if what had happened could be folded away and tidied up if spoken quietly enough. The image refused to fade. The bed, still warm. The way his friend had laughed nervously, as though caught in a harmless misunderstanding. The look on his wife's face. Not fear, not shame, but annoyance, sharp and fleeting, like a child interrupted mid-game. That look hurt more than anything else. It told him he was already inconvenient. He reached the car and sat there for a long time, forehead resting against the steering wheel. His breathing sounded too loud in the enclosed space. When he finally started the engine, it felt less like a decision and more like momentum taking over. The city rolled past him in blurred fragments. Red lights smeared into long streaks. Storefronts flashed and vanished. At some point, the radio turned on by accident, spilling out a song he didn't recognize, and he shut it off with more force than necessary. He drove without direction at first, then with grim certainty. The route unfolded from memory, older than his adult life, older than his marriage. By the time the buildings thinned and the road narrowed, his hands had steadied. Shock gave way to something dull and heavy, a weight that settled behind his ribs. He felt hollowed out, like a house stripped of furniture, echoing with every thought. Night swallowed the road. Trees crowded close, their branches knitting together overhead. When the house finally appeared, it startled him despite knowing it would be there. His grandfather's place stood slightly apart from the others, as if it had chosen isolation long before anyone else did. The roof sagged in the middle. One shutter hung crooked. It looked tired, but unyielding. He cut the engine and listened. Crickets. Wind brushing through leaves. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and fell silent. The quiet was so complete it made his ears ring. He stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply. The air smelled of damp earth and pine sap. It felt cleaner than the air he'd left behind, sharper, as if it demanded attention. Inside, the house was cold. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for years. He moved through the rooms slowly, phone light cutting narrow paths through the dark. His grandfather's coat still hung by the door, heavy wool smelling faintly of smoke and old cologne. He touched it, then pulled his hand away, unsettled by the familiarity. In the kitchen, a chipped mug sat exactly where it always had, beside the sink. It felt like stepping into a paused moment rather than an abandoned space. Exhaustion claimed him abruptly. He dropped his bag, collapsed onto the narrow bed in the back room, and stared at the ceiling. The house creaked softly, settling around him. Sleep came in fragments, dragging him under and releasing him again, filled with half-formed dreams that dissolved as soon as he reached for them. Morning arrived quietly. Pale light slipped through the curtains, tracing patterns on the floor. For a brief, merciful second, he didn't remember why his chest felt tight. Then it all came back. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face, listening. No traffic, no neighbors arguing, just the steady, ordinary sounds of a village waking up. Outside, the yard had gone wild. Grass reached his knees. Weeds choked the fence line. He found an old pair of gloves in the shed and began clearing, working until sweat soaked through his shirt. The physical labor dulled the edge of his thoughts. Each task was simple, measurable. Pull, lift, stack. By the time the sun stood overhead, his muscles ached and his mind felt quieter. The village watched him. He felt it in the way people paused as he passed, the way conversations dipped and resumed. At the shop, the woman behind the counter studied him for a moment too long before speaking. Her smile was careful, practiced. "You're staying at your grandfather's," she said. "Yes." She nodded slowly. People wondered what would happen to that place. He took his change and left, the words echoing louder than they should have. Back at the house, curiosity stirred. He began opening drawers, cupboards, boxes tucked beneath the stairs. His grandfather had kept everything, even things with no obvious purpose. The notebooks were stacked neatly in a crate. They weren't personal in the way he expected. No reflections, no confessions. Just facts, names, dates, small observations. At first they meant nothing. Then patterns emerged. In the floor of the bedroom, a loose board shifted beneath his weight. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth, were letters yellowed with age. He read them slowly, sitting on the floor as dust settled around him. They spoke of meetings held late at night, of warnings ignored, of pressure applied quietly but relentlessly. The fire was mentioned again and again. Not as an accident, but as a thread narrowly avoided. His grandfather's name appeared at the end of several letters, always with the same tone, resigned, resolute. Understanding dawned gradually, painfully. The story he'd grown up hearing was incomplete. The man blamed for negligence had been protecting others, standing between the village and something far worse. He had accepted blame to keep things from unraveling. Anger flared, hot and sudden. Not only at the injustice done to a dead man, but at how familiar it felt. Silence. Sacrifice. Someone else walking away clean. Days slipped by. He fixed the roof properly. Returned borrowed tools. Helped where he was asked. People softened. An old man told him stories about his grandfather that didn't match the rumors. A woman left bread on his porch without explanation. No one apologized outright, but their actions carried weight. When the car appeared on the road, his stomach tightened. His former friend stepped out, city confidence stripped down to nerves. They spoke in the yard. The explanations tumbled out. Debts, bad decisions, promises that had seemed harmless at first. His wife's name surfaced like an afterthought, reduced to leverage. Listening, he felt strangely detached. The betrayal hurt, but it no longer defined him. "You should leave," he said when the words ran out. The truth didn't stay buried. He showed the letters. Names were connected, records checked, stories compared. The village reacted loudly, messily. On the day people gathered near the old storage site, voices rose and fell in waves. Accusations flew. Defenses crumbled. Through it all, he stood quietly, feeling more like a witness than a hero. When it was over, nothing felt resolved. Just acknowledged. That evening, he returned to the house as the sky darkened. The forest hummed softly. He sat on the steps, thinking of the life he'd left behind, the man he had been before everything cracked open. Staying wasn't escape, it was choice. The house creaked around him, familiar and imperfect, holding truths that had waited a long time to be spoken. For the first time in a while, the future didn't feel like something to outrun. It felt like something he could walk toward, one quiet step at a time.